being able to work with people who are as committed to an idea as you are is rare.
Yeah.
And really, in any kind of relationship, is something to be treasured.
Hello, and welcome to a special video edition of the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. My name is Ryan Claytor. I'm a university professor and cartoonist, and I have a Patreon page where I feature weekly updates about my art practice, as well as in-depth looks at process posts documenting how a particular work was made. I even talk about lessons I've taught my students about making comics, and occasionally I'll interview people on a podcast, which is what you're about to experience here today. So I am interviewing three folks, Daniel Elkin, Rob Clow, and Alex Hoffman, who collectively make up Fieldmouse Press. And Fieldmouse Press is responsible for SOLRAD, the online comics literary magazine, and more recently, they've even dipped their toes into print publishing with their first publication by Ariel Bordeaux, Clutter, which is a sexual assault memoir in comics. So I'm really excited to share this conversation I had with the folks behind Fieldmouse Press. We dive into a little bit of their history, where they're at right now, and what they're hoping to do in the future. And we get into some interesting topics like why they decided to form a 501c3 nonprofit for the entity of Fieldmouse Press. And if you stick around, you'll even get a sneak peek at the publication schedule for Fieldmouse Press for 2022, something they've not shared publicly before. So stick around, I think you'll enjoy it. As we get started, I just want to let listeners know that Fieldmouse Press is a nonprofit publisher of comics, criticism, interviews, and essays. And before we met here today, you pointed me to an interview that SmashPages did with the founding members of Fieldmouse Press, but that was back in late 2019, actually. And at the time, SOLRAD, the comics literary site, which you produce, was slated to launch in January 2020. So since then, obviously, there have been a fair number of changes, like an incredibly robust presence on solrad.co, as well as your recent and inaugural publishing venture with Ariel Bordeaux's Clutter. But since then, I've had a heck of a time finding any sort of in-depth discussion about the Fieldmouse Press group since that interview that is going on 3 years old at this point. So I'm hoping we can illuminate folks on how things have changed for each of you and Fieldmouse Press as a whole. So maybe that's a good point where I can open it up to each of you to say, hi, hello, welcome, and who are you? And let's talk about Fieldmouse. So can you guys go around the screen here and do some introductions?
Yeah. Elkin should definitely.
Daniel.
Elkin's our leader.
El Presidento. Hey, whatever the.
So I'm Daniel Elkin. I'm president of Fieldmouse Press and editor-in-chief of SOLRAD.
My name is Alex Hoffman. I'm the publisher of SOLRAD, as well as the publisher of our print books, and I do most of the production work for our print offerings.
I'm Rob Clow. I haven't written much for for SOLRAD lately, but freelance critic, acquisitions editor is the fancy title that Alex gave me.
It's a good title, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I keep an eye out for contributors to SOLRAD, both for criticism and for comics. But for Fieldmouse specifically, I've worked a lot on acquisitions and also editing the books and working directly with the artists and doing so.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And can you guys talk about your background just a little bit prior to starting Fieldmouse? I know there was a lot of comics criticism going on in each of your backgrounds, but maybe you can just touch on that a little bit before we dive into Fieldmouse.
So I guess I'll start. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I actually went back and read through that interview that you were referencing earlier, just to remind myself of our innocence back then, and pre-pandemic and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, well, I started writing about comics, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and for a number of different sites. And then I became small press editor of the now defunct Comics Bulletin. And as that was sort of waning a little bit, I started my own site called Your Chicken Enemy and started publishing wonderful criticism from the likes of gentlemen like Alex Hoffman and Rob Clow and Ryan Carey. And as we continued on through, Alex, I don't want to step on your toes, but Alex had his own site, and Rob had his own site, and Ryan had his own site. And it just dawned on me one day that between the four of us, we were sort of doing the same thing in our own little silos. And it sort of made sense that, well, why shouldn't we just come together? And I pitched that idea, and the rest is history, I guess.
And then I took that idea and then blew it up.
Yes,
is what actually happened.
Yes.
So to kind of piggyback off of what Elka just said is, so I've been a comics critic for 14 years now, I think. I started in 2008, focusing on manga and Japanese comics with my own blog. Back then you could have a blog. It was like a thing. And worked for a variety of publications, including the Comics Journal, Comics MNT, Manga Village, Comics Village, a few others, various sites. Daniel was like, let's form a Voltron of comics criticism, and I was like, no, let's form a publishing company. And he was like, what? And I was like, what you're asking to do, I was like, when you think about this, what you're recommending we do is launch a literary magazine, essentially, an online version of that. And I was like, there has to be some place where we can work inside of the what you want to do without it just being like just the Alex, Daniel, Rob, and Ryan show. And so that was, and so that was a process where I was like, well, why don't we consider going through a nonprofit organization model? And so we did a 501c3. And yeah, it was we wrote the business plan, did a bunch of other stuff. And so it really led to what Fieldmouse Press started as, which was mostly the publisher of SOLRAD. But after I kind of pitched this idea of like, let's start a publishing company, I think it was probably Rob who was like, and someday we could probably publish a book or something. And here we are in March of 2022, and we have just done that very thing. So a prescient critic, as always, Mr. Rob Clow.
Nice segue. Let's hear from Rob.
Yeah, I'm entering my 20th year of comics criticism. And I like long simmering ideas. So for example, with regard to clutter, first
nice
book,
product placement. Well done.
Yeah.
of which I'm very proud. The previous project from Ariel had been about a decade earlier when Paper Rocket, a small press publisher run by Robin Chapman, who is one of mini comics' greatest champions in many forms, thought Ariel Bordeaux's Deep Girl mini comics of the early 90s were very influential, and they're massively out of print, and maybe I should do a collection. She did, and she hired me to interview Ariel. And I did a long career-spanning interview. Unfortunately, most of that got eaten and lost, but the salient points with regard to Deep Girl we published in that book and Ariel sent me everything. When I do career spanning interviews, I basically say to artists, send me everything you've ever done, if you can. And one of the things I was curious about with Ariel is that she had just finished getting an MFA from the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. And I thought this was very curious because Ariel's my age. And why does she need to go to comics school? And that's one reason I was curious to interview her. And she talked a lot about why she went to school. And then, as is noted in the Indicia, Claytor was originally her master's thesis. And I remember reading it and thinking just how excellent it was, really striking and powerful. And I was like, why haven't you published this? And then we made some inquiries at that point. And one of them, I thought Uncivilized Press would be a good home for it. And Tom Kaczynski said, this is good, but it needs a third act. And then Ariel kind of sat on that. And in the back of my mind, for the last decade, I was thinking, this is a book that needs to get published. And so when it was brought round that it was time to maybe start thinking about this, I had this project in my back pocket. And I think one of the things I bring to Fieldmouse and SOLRAD is I have been doing this for 20 years, and I knew people before I started writing, so I know a lot of people. And I'm a natural connector. I like connecting people to different projects, so that I knew that I could help make this happen. And Daniel kind of provides, in addition to being an excellent and highly demanding editor, he's the impetus. He's kind of like the guiding light. He's the one who asked the question, what we're doing consistent with our mission? How can we Daniel has like the big ideas. And Alex's fastidious attention to detail is basically what keeps things going on a daily basis. In addition to his own, excellent abilities as a writer, he's really handy with the spreadsheet. And that budgeting, his ability to budget, think about numbers, think about like the raw reality of things, file papers. These are things I hate doing. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, to be fair, it is.
Yeah, and I'm older and I'm a free-time freelancer. And one of the things I kind of vowed to myself was like, I'm not afraid of work, but I am afraid of being bored. I don't like doing boring things anymore. And my own line on it is like, because I thought going to grad school, I was like, it sounds like a lot of work. I'd rather just do this other thing instead. I don't like having to do, a means to do something, to do another thing, when I'm just like, well, can I just do the thing instead of going through, jumping through hoops? And that's literally how I became a writer. I just started writing and hoped that people and hustled things out there. And then in addition to that, I'm a teacher. I've taught a couple courses. I'm a freelance editor. I have a service called Rent a Critic for cartoonists, which has been a success. And I'm the programmer of SPX. So I'm not writing as much criticism as I want, but I'm still doing something with comics every day of my life.
Cool. Well, congrats on 2 decades, Rob. That's amazing. I'll have to insert some applause here. But Alex was touching on the fact that Fieldmouse Press is a nonprofit, 501c3, which according to the IRS is commonly referred to as a charitable organization eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions. So one of the questions I had for you was, can you talk about your motivation for creating a nonprofit? Like, why was this an integral part of forming this group or entity? And what sort of 501c3 benefits appealed to you and influenced this decision?
Let me start that and briefly answer and say the reason we're a nonprofit is because there is no money in comics criticism in a for-profit manner. And that's not being self-deprecating. That's the stone cold truth. We've seen many other models that have tried advertising, tried paywalls, and even some that like get hooked up to like a larger corporate interest. When said larger corporate interest loses interest because they're not making money, because you don't make money, then they drop their sponsorship and then they're gone. And so the kind of cutting the Gordian knot of this problem was, I believe, Alex's idea, and he can expand on that. But of saying, okay, let's go this other route, knowing that this other model doesn't work, and see what happens.
Yeah. So when we were thinking about this, what would eventually become SOLRAD, there was this general understanding that new media in the world of the things that exist now, like, or the things that existed 10 years ago in terms of structures, like I'm trying to think of like a good example, like these great comics websites that got bought up by media empires across the web spectrum as things transitioned to Web 2.0 and then slowly crumbled into nothingness. We're all tied to that, as Rob said, tied to that main concern about advertising dollars and all this other, these profit motives and things like that. And I think one of the things that we were really interested in was creating this egalitarian concept where that understanding that there's not a whole lot of money in comics criticism. If we're going to be paying someone to write, understanding that we're doing something that we're not necessarily going to be able to pay a professional wage, can we at least raise the standards for what we're doing? Can we at least say this is not the best that we can do, but it's better than everything else that's out there right now, and continue to try to push that envelope. I think that was kind of like the push for the model that we have with SOLRAD. And I think to a large extent, I think that has led to some unique voices at SOLRAD that would never have been published in some of the various, larger sites for criticism, because we have that more literary magazine focus. I think that's a key defining factor. But I think the nonprofit is also about recognizing, I think, the people that support you, right? Being a 501c3 offers your patrons, if you will, an actual benefit. Even if tax laws in the United States are cumbersome to say the least, if someone's throwing $3 into the proverbial tip jar, being a tax deductible nonprofit gives them an opportunity, if they can use it, to do so in a way that's helpful for them. A lot of the kind of like new media stuff, whether it's Substack or Patreon or what have you, are all built on this patronage kind of model. And so we wanted to say, well, if you want to be a patron or whatever, then at least, there's, besides you supporting the work, there's also some additional tangible benefits. But I think that kind of was the initial thought process, I would say. But as we move forward in the development of what is now a growing publishing company, I think one of the other pieces that we thought was, how do we make a comics publisher that is able to take risks that other publishers aren't going to be willing to take or can't take because of profit motives? Or how do we design contracts to be as worker-centric and egalitarian as possible? How do we do something that fits the needs of both the artist and the general public? And I think that's we've been able to pursue that kind of business model because we're not beholden to a bottom line. That gives us a lot of flexibility to make decisions that if I were trying to run a business that reported to shareholders or had to, you know, I wouldn't be able to make them. And that's kind of where we are now. And my hope is in the future that things continue to move and that we will see more of this growth so that we can do a better job of the things that we're interested in, paying our contributors more, you know, offering those same benefits that we want to offer to all of these people, kind of in a more, I keep on using this word, egalitarian manner, right? We want everybody that's involved in the project, if you will, to be lifted up by that project. So
another thing that I haven't really mentioned too much also is by being a nonprofit, that opens us up to some grant opportunities that would otherwise not be available to a for-profit organization. And then the other thing that is sort of at my heart is that by establishing ourselves as a nonprofit, it sort of gives us a little bit of credibility when I start to talk to other arts organizations outside of comics, whether they be literary or fine arts or whatever. I'm able to walk in and say, hey, this is a valid art form. This is something that needs to be part of the conversation when it comes to talking about what is art. And because we're a profit, that makes it gives us a little bit of a legitimacy as well when I walk into those conversations.
And Daniel's done a great job of bringing Fieldmouse Press into those conversations, both in the Northern California area and as well as with with a variety of small arts and independent publishing kind of organizations, much to our benefit, you know.
So Alex, I wanted to bounce off of something you were mentioning, the fact that you pay your contributors. Like that sounds like it shouldn't be groundbreaking, but you know, I wrote an article for you guys about up and coming talent Ray Allen Everett and her first book, The Manderfield Devil. And after submitting the piece, I was surprised to hear back that you wanted to pay me. And I think at the time I told you, you know, just keep it in your hoppers. I want to see you guys keep doing what you're doing. But that really surprised me. So I'm awfully curious about a lot of things, but starting with, where does the money come from? Are you simultaneously grant writing as you're writing criticism, or does this just come from tithing your respective day job incomes, or like how does this work?
I think there's a little bit of all of that, right? There are, you know, we have a financial fiscal sponsorship through NDACE, which is the Arts Council in Nevada County. I think I got the acronym right. NCACE.
NCACE, yeah.
Yeah. And so we do have a sizable donation pool from readers across various platforms, whether that's Patreon or if it's other donation sites. We definitely put in a lot of input money, you know, like to launch. Daniel and I put in a small investment to try and get things launched. And I still donate, and so does Daniel, to the organization, but I wouldn't say that we're donating a lot of money. You know, I think I think ultimately it comes from those reader donations, all this patronage kind of stuff. And then, yes, there are these smaller grants that we're applying for and working on. And because we got this, because Daniel was so thoughtful about working with NCACE, we've been able to apply for grants that we have not been able to, would not have otherwise been able to have access to because of that fiscal sponsorship. So it's just like probably most nonprofits, everything runs kind of on a shoestring. It kind of has to, because we're still relatively young. But I think we have this core set of values that we're not going to walk away from, and I think that's the defining factor for me, at least.
I have two things to say about this. Number one, there are very few websites that pay critics for their work. We're one of them. TCJ is another one of them. There aren't many others. And I will say this, and I will say it publicly. There are comics criticism websites that have Patreons, and I see, because I look at their Patreons, how much they get every month. And because I know how much it costs to run a website, I know that they're making money and they're not paying their contributors. And this makes me very curious as to why. Not even a nominal fee. Very, very prominent Eisner winning websites. And I will say no more about that other than that everyone who writes about issues related to social justice and egalitarianism that literally doesn't put their money where their mouth is troublesome, shall we say. I also want to mention something else in full transparency on the site, is that our mission from the very beginning was to publish new comics on the site, new work, and pay people a page rate. Not a huge one, but a reasonable one. And the fact of the matter is we haven't done many of those because we can't afford to. It's like if we pay someone for a 4-page comic, we could pay like 3 or 4 different pieces of criticism with that. But a lot of what's gone right with our website is been kind of pure random chance. And one of them is, I say we haven't paid for many new pieces. It's true, but there's comics all the time on SOLRAD. How does that work? Well, it works because of what we call SOLRAD Presents. And an artist, Riley Haddon, approached us with something.
I'm sorry, Rob, sorry to interrupt you. Can you say that one more time? You cut out on the artist's name.
Their name is Riley Haddon. And they've been publishing this comic, Cricket, on Instagram. And Riley knew at that time that two things. Instagram had become like the new home for cartoonists to post their stuff for free, number one. Number two, it was a terrible place to publish comics for multiple reasons. Number one, publishing like anything like a 4-panel strip was impossible. You had to do it like a single panel at a time. You couldn't publish larger works. Most people looking on their phone, which is a terrible way to look at comics. Furthermore, it's owned by Facebook, and which may or may not actually own the things that people put up on Instagram. It's always been a little hazy. And that was in the good times with Instagram. Things have gotten much worse for cartoonists. Yeah. The reason is because they've changed their algorithm such that because TikTok is destroying all other forms of social media in terms of views, because people like watching videos, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, are moving toward the video clip model. And so on Instagram, if you don't have the video, you get pushed down in the algorithm, which means for a lot of cartoonists who are getting tons of views, those views are basically plummeted. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a thing just in general where webcomics, which had been an extremely robust way of self-publishing for well over 2 decades, it's increasingly hard to find success doing webcomics. A, because of the cost of hosting if you host it on your own site, but B, getting eyeballs to them now is so much more difficult than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And you have options of like going to like professional sites like Webtoons, but you should look at a Webtoons contract sometime and see what you're in for. Sign one of those. And so SolRad is basically, you know, they approached us and said, what if would you be interested in publishing my strip here? And we were like, well, we like your work very much, but we can't pay you. And Riley said, that's okay if you can host the strip, you know, as kind of an aggregate with everything else you're doing. That's good enough for me because it'll look good. It'll be in the right format. And so Alex came up with a contract, and it's basically, we'll host these strips for free for as long as they want. And if at any time they want us to take them down, we will, which we did for one cartoonist who told us, hey, I just got a book deal. You know, can you take these down? And we're like, sure. Artist retains all rights for these, which is different from for the pieces that we pay for. We retain the rights for a longer period of time. And SolRad Presents has been like a smash success.
Yeah.
Especially for days where like we don't necessarily have a piece of criticism ready to go. We've got so many of these strips, and one of our newest ones from Nick Breutzmann for his new book is so good.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably good. And when that thing gets published, it's going to be a big deal. But yeah, transparency about this kind of thing is extremely rare in comics, and to the detriment of all.
Yeah, I think Rob's main points are super salient to the conversation, because that was the first thing we said to, you know, what Rob said was like, we can't pay you. It was the first thing we said to Riley, whose work is very to me. Riley more comics like Astral Birth Canal and Cricket was this latest project that I just fell in love with on Instagram and had a hard time finding it. You know, it's like, where's Riley's newest comic? Like scrolling through, and so when they approached us, it was kind of one of those light bulb moments. And you know, one of the things we're trying, you know, noting that we're not paying our SolRad Presents artists, one of the things we're trying to do is use the book publishing arm of Fieldmouse to help expand access to readers through potential anthology projects in the future. So that's definitely something that we're planning on trying to figure out how to make that work in the near future. So it's not, it's one of those projects that I think comes from, I don't think it would have worked, or I don't think we could have made it happen had we not had that nonprofit ethos. I don't think this could have been something that could have like naturally evolved without that.
Yeah, because immediately after Riley did that, I posted on Twitter and said, would other people find this useful? And I got like a lot of responses.
He did.
Yeah, it was, I think hundreds of people saying, yeah, if you would take care of, like, if you could just help me share my art with other people, that would be, that's what I need. I don't need I don't need you to pay me. And so, like, would I love to pay our SolRad Presents contributors? Absolutely, I would. And that's in my 10-year plan or what have you. But I think that, we've had people like celebrated cartoonists like newcomer Scott Finch, who's now publishing his graphic novel that he just showed up out of nowhere with this amazing esoteric comic about chickens and dogs called The Domesticated Afterlife. And Scott was like, I printed this as a graphic novel. I really like it that way, but I want people to read it, and I know that they'll read it on SolRad. So would you please publish this for me? And we were like, absolutely, this is amazing. And I'm very happy to represent all of the artists that we have on SolRad Presents. I think they run the gamut from Carl Krumpholz, whose autobio work is like just an absolute joy to read every week, to Jeff Harmatz, whose silly Danger Diver comics are just like sometimes like stunningly beautiful, and then sometimes it's a fart joke, and I love that blend. I think everybody that contributes in SolRad Presents is just a gem. So that's been one of the big highlights of the project.
Yeah, and I love that it just shows the gamut of what comics can be too. And I'm really proud when I talk to organizations. That's one of the things I point out is these are the kind of comics that we're talking about. This is why this is a valid art form.
So what is the lineup or backlog of SolRad Presents look like? Do you have a bunch of comics waiting in the wings? Do you have a submissions process for who you'll accept and publish on the website? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think there are some folks that are making comics continuously and who are like sending them in on a week-to-week basis. Derek Van Giesen is one of those. He just started with us with a new edition of Eel Mansion, or well, it's it's kind of Eel Mansion, it's kind of not. It's Derek. He's just doing his own thing, and it's a wonderful thing. And then you have some folks who are like Scott Finch. It's like, here's all the files for the book, and if you could please publish a chapter a week, that would be great. Thank you. And so it's very artist specific. We've had some turnover and change in our organization. We have this editorial board, if you will, this group of critics who work on the back end of SolRad, and that includes me, Daniel, Rob, and then we've just recently added Ed Haynes, a wonderful comics critic from the UK. And Ed has stepped on as the assistant publisher with me, so that I can focus a little more on the book publishing aspects of the I guess the pencil pushing and the spreadsheet keeping that Rob referred to. Ed's been great because they've been able to take over some of the Reddit's work and let me focus on some of the other tasks that need to be done. But yeah, there's a variety of ways that we kind of manage that backlog, and there is a submissions process. If people are interested, I get probably 1 or 2 emails a month from people who are like, hey, I saw that you have this thing. Could you take a look and see if this is something that works for you? And we have, for some folks, we've said, we'd love to work with you. And then they're like, I thought about it and no thanks. And there are some folks who are like, well, it seems like a pretty big commitment. I don't know, like to publish something on your website. And it's like, what we're really trying to do is make the service, we're trying to make it a service, right? Like the idea is, how can we better serve cartoonists who are in this, in this real struggle, I think, to build a readership, maintain a home for their work in perpetuity, with web decay and all the things you think about with the internet. And how do we make it as easy as possible for them to get new readers? And so that was the hope or the goal. And everything
especially
else
since so many sites like Tumblr or whatever will suddenly slap some new restriction on content. That will never ever happen with us.
Right. Now we do want to make sure, like, I guess it goes through a review where we sit down and look at the material and say,
Yep.
does this meet our goals for SolRad? Does this meet our expectations, or is it appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish? And sometimes we said no, but I think the vast majority of the time it's been yes. How can we help you reach more people? Because the people that are interested in it are not interested in the kind of like they're not interested in that signing that Webtoons contract for the work they're doing.
So I have a couple questions. First, basically, cartoonists are coming to you who are hungry for exposure for a wider audience because you're transparent and telling them, look, we're not going to pay you, but yes, we will publish your comics on our site. What sort of numbers are you looking at in terms of site visitors? How many people see it? Like, what sort of exposure are cartoonists getting for being featured on your website?
Last year, SOLRAD had, I'd have to look at the numbers for you, just like to get you the most up-to-date numbers, but it was something like 1.1 million unique viewers in 2021. So I think now that's the whole website, right? So that's, and who knows where some of those folks come from. But I can tell you that each of the comics on the site have at least 5 to 10,000 views, like in a general week. That's it. It really depends on the cartoonist. I think some of the younger cartoonists or who don't have a stronger following, like Andrew Neal's a great example of a cartoonist who picked up a lot of viewership relatively quickly. And it started low, and then Andrew's always just plugging away on Twitter and Instagram, and so that started to build up and build up and build up. And so it's hard to quantify where everyone's coming from. A lot of it's from like social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. But there's a lot of organic traffic as well. I think it was 1.1 million views. Sorry, not 1.1 million viewers. That's a different number. But I think a relatively respectable amount of eyes looking at stuff. Now, are we the same size as Webtoons or Tapas or all those other places? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We cater to a really specific niche within comics. We're interested in a very specific thing. But we haven't had anybody who's joined the project who said, I'm not really getting out of this what I'm hoping to get out of it. Because at the end of the day, the goal is that it's a service to these folks. And if they're not happy, then I want to do whatever I can to help you be happy, or we can part ways, because I think at the end of the day, again, it's that transparency. It's like, we're not trying to use this as a scheme or anything like that. We want to do our best to serve the art form and serve the people that work so hard to make the art, and at the end of the day, if we're able to do that, then that's a beautiful thing. And if we're not doing that, then we got to get out of the way, right? Like, that's the important piece.
So in addition to the three of you, there's a board of directors, which include Jules Bakes, Francesca Lynn, and Rachel Miller. I was hoping maybe you could talk about the board of directors and how these additional folks contribute to Fieldmouse Press.
Yeah, so the board of directors really, as part of the nonprofit financial rules and all of the kind of other things, incorporation in the state of California, we're required to have a board of directors. They give us, like most directors of a nonprofit organization, they give us a lot of leeway and freedom to explore and to work on the mission of the nonprofit as we see fit. They give us routine feedback when we have specific. We went to the entire board when we first were planning to start book publishing and saying, is this something we should be doing? Here's the project that we have in mind. What do you think? And got a very enthusiastic yes from every single person saying, yes, you should do this. Yes, this is a book we want you to publish. We want to expand and so that we took that to heart, and we're trying to be, I guess, respectful of everyone's knowing that everyone is so busy. So we're not doing, it's not like we're meeting every 2 weeks or something like that. It's a more traditional nonprofit board. So the meetings are quarterly or biannually. But we're checking in with folks regularly and having these conversations at the margins to try and make sure that they have some oversight over what we're doing and that they're comfortable with the work that we're accomplishing.
And we fully expect that if we're doing something that other board members are not in approval of, they'll step forward and say, you guys shouldn't be doing that. And that's the kind of feedback that we're looking for all the time.
And one of the nice things about having this board of people who are really engaged with comics and who love comics and who are also talented in their own fields. You think about Francisca Lynn, who is just a remarkable teacher and a really talented voice, and Rachel Miller. Goodness gracious, what a talented writer, and she's now one of the editors of TCJ, the print version. Having those folks on our board to take a look at everything we're doing and say, this makes sense. One of the things that they worked on with me together was a complete, like, when we launched SOLRAD 6 months in, I was like, let's take a look at this together. How do I make this better? How do we improve this? And they gave me, as the publisher, essentially 2 or 3 pages of actionable work to get done on the site to improve it. And I think the end result has been a much better reading experience for everyone that comes to the site. So things like that have been a real godsend in terms of like making the thing that we do better.
Yeah.
What were some of those notes they gave you?
Oh goodness. Let's see. How specific things were set up inside of the site, the ways that the site linked together, like how do you navigate, like even things like how do you develop for the first probably 3 or 4 months, the site was not extremely like phone and tablet friendly. I had to do a lot of work in the back end to try and fix that. They were a big push to, could you make this readable on a phone? It's like most of you people are going to come to this through a phone. So implementing those kind of like those smart and web sensitive designs that are more like Web 2, 2.5, if you will, and trying to come up with a website that met the needs of readers from whatever spectrum they're coming from, whether they're a brand new person coming to SOLRAD for the first time, or if they're an engaged regular reader. How do we make sure that they're dropping in and finding something useful and valid, something that they want to get out of the experience, and then keep on coming back.
And also one of the things that came out of a board meeting was there was this sense, and I can't remember who said it, but she was trying to explain what it was and was having a hard time explaining what SOLRAD was.
Francesca.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She was like, what is SOLRAD exactly?
Yeah, and so just that tagline of the online literary magazine for comics, that came out of that conversation. And I think that clarified a lot of things that we hadn't thought of before and made it much easier to talk about what SOLRAD is. So that was a really big one.
So, I think just like all projects, right? If you get too close to it, sometimes you can't see the forest from the trees, right? Mm-hmm. And having the board kind of in the background saying, okay, but for real, what is going on here has been really helpful, because I know that I've written the code. I know exactly what's going on here. It's easy for me to get into the weeds, and sometimes I need someone with that 40,000 foot view to tell me back up a little bit. That's so helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I remember feeling like things were a little demystified when I saw that tagline on your website. So I'm glad you guys took that point to heart. So Fieldmouse Press recently ran their first crowdfunding campaign for their first printed comic, Clutter by Ariel Bordeaux, which we've been talking about. I think we all probably have it on our screen at some point or another. That campaign wrapped successfully in August 2021. And I recently received my copy here in March 2022, which looks great and reads great, by the way. Thank you. To say, I'd like to talk to you about Fieldmouse's first foray into publishing. And first, like, how did that go for you? And what were some lessons learned from your first printed publication?
I think basically Rob is the kind of the book whisperer, if you will, and I'm the guy with the spreadsheet that sits behind the computer monitor and pulls all my hair out. And as you can see, I'm running out of hair to pull. So
you're in an elite club, Alex.
It's a beautiful place. I love my hairline. I just like to also make fun of it because it gets everybody to laugh. I think, for me, I think a lot of this was a lot of first time work. I mean, I'm involved from a day job kind of perspective. I'm in clinical medicine, like medical care. So I've written business plans. I've quoted out stuff. So like that idea, those concepts were not that difficult for me. It was not that, so that stuff was it was new faces, but similar ideas. I think the thing that really took me by surprise was how much of a juggling act running a crowdfunding campaign can be. You have these integral moving parts. I'm working with a book designer. I'm working with the artist. I'm working with a printer. I've got to get the postcards and the bookmarks printed, and there's all these just little things that you have to kind of keep juggling in order to make sure that the project hits on time. And I was pretty proud of the fact that we said that we would have the book distributed by February 2022, and they started shipping the second week of February. And the United States Postal Service being what it is, I'm happy you got it before April. But I think we budgeted our time kind of conservatively, thinking that it's going to take longer for us to get stuff done than we think it's going to take. That turned out to be mostly true. And I think that, like the whole process, like understanding that process from like from just like the logistics perspective has been very helpful to think about how do we do this again, but with more books, and how do we build out a future publishing season, if you will, now that we have this one book under our belt.
Daniel, Rob, either of you want to talk about your first printed publication before I ask you about what's next?
Yeah, sure. When I retired from my day job a couple of years ago, one reason why I didn't jump into something similar to it was I kind of realized that some of my old skills with regard to data stuff were kind of outdated. And I thought, well, maybe this is, this is the time to start being a freelancer. And as I was doing it and trying to figure out ways to make a living, I realized that I had a number of skills that were otherwise kind of useless or felt useless. But then I realized in the right context, could be extremely useful to people. And one of them is my experience as an editor. It's funny on this site that, and that's Ryan and it's actually the three of us. I've never had the urge to make comics, write them, draw them. I just think about them. And my background academically is in philosophy. So overthinking things is what I've done for a long time. But one thing I did realize, and years ago when I was a comics editor for a magazine called Other, was that I do like thinking about and organizing them. And more to the point, while I don't necessarily have the urge to create something for myself, I really like sitting down, working with an artist and telling them what they should be doing instead. And in fact, it's a criticism of people have critiqued my criticism for that reason. It's like, this feels like you're doing an editing session instead of a criticism session. And it's like, yeah, you're right. Whatever. This is part of the package. But actually putting that into place with artists, because I work with a lot of cartoonists who are basically stuck,
Mhm.
and they're like, you know, I have this thing, I don't know how to make it work, or I'm at a crossroads, I don't know what I should be working on. Um, they need someone to bounce these ideas off of. And they also need encouragement
Mhm.
from like someone who kind of knows what they're doing. And so that's why working with Ariel was such a pleasure, because she'd been sitting on this project for like a decade and never quite found the motivation for various reasons to try and finish it or think about what finishing it would mean. And basically I gave her one, and I said, we want to publish this, and Tom K is right, you need not necessarily a long third act, but something more like an epilogue.
Mhm.
And we like kind of brainstormed about what that might look like, and I deemed her, and then she and knocked it out of the park. And it's I thought it was really effective, and well earned, and it fit really within visually the context, the rest of the book.
Mhm.
And this is what I like doing. I like doing it with my clients, and I really like doing it with the people we're working with. Um, and as to what we're doing next, do you want to give a little preview, Alex?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to give a little preview.
Why don't you
Once,
talk about a good person trouble, and I'll talk about
yeah,
the.
absolutely. So let me see if I've got can I, Ryan, if you let me, can I share my screen potentially? Is that a
You
thing I
should
can
be
do?
able to now.
All right, hold on 1 second, please, while I get this image for you. So we're, even as we started thinking, oh, we need to think about like what's coming up next. Is this just like a one-time deal, or is this something where we're going to be doing this like more often? Like,
Scale publisher.
is this one book going to be the book, or are we going to do this more frequently? And I think it really became quickly obvious that we had, that Rob and I had a blast doing it. We had a fair amount of success doing it. And I think, the feedback that we've gotten about the book, about, people's experience with the work that we're doing, has been extraordinarily positive. And so that's been, for me, that's been a real, been a real game changer. I've always had, I just like Rob said, I have never had the desire to create comics, but I've always had comics in the back of my mind where I've been like, I would love to see this in English, or I would love to see that. I would love this person to get not just 16 pages, but 116 pages to work on this thing that they're really interested in. And I know it's like completely not viable from a financial perspective. Like, how do I get to that? How do we fix that issue? And so that's kind of where we've been looking. So let me see if I can get this pulled up. Let's see here. Okay, is that it?
This is like that suspenseful moment
Yes.
before the big unveiling.
Yes. Dun, dun, dun.
So are we getting a scoop here? Have you shown this to anyone?
I'm
Yeah,
scooping you. I'm scooping you.
Nice.
we haven't discussed publicly at all.
No, we have not. So we have this. So what you're looking at right now is the cover of one of our next books coming out through probably in early June to a crowdfunding site near you. We could talk about what the goal is. We're probably not going to be using Kickstarter for reasons associated with NFTs and the potential switch to Web 3.0. But Noel Kroger's Good Person Trouble, which is a kind of a play on Judith Butler's gender troubles and Bertolt Brecht's The Good Person of Szechuan, or The Good Man of Szechuan. An award-winning German cartoonist, a young cartoonist, someone who's working with these concepts of the stage and gender presentation and transness, and some really fascinating comic, hilarious, beautifully illustrated, and I'm beyond thrilled to be publishing this coming very soon. So this is going to be part of our spring summer season for 2022.
Alex,
really,
can you say the title in German for me?
no, well, I can try. Let's see. Das Unbehagen des guten Menschen, I believe, is the. I'll have to look at the file one more time to make sure I got that right. Noel is probably cringing somewhere.
I know, right?
You're a mean man, Daniel.
Sorry.
He did that on purpose.
When they first brought it up, it was still in German, right? And so the title was still in German, and I looked at it and I said, "What is that?" And Alex said it, and I just went, "Oh, I don't even care. I want to publish that."
And it's an amazing story. I absolutely cannot tell you how excited I am about this book. How working, it was our first translation, so that was a whole brand new set of experiences. And really, because we developed kind of this, I guess, these relationships with other publishers, Ari, or I'm sorry, no, is that right? Did I say that right? No, Avi. Sorry. Avi from Silver Sprocket was like, "Hey, I know a German translator that I can refer you to," and so we were able to kind of like work through that connection to find someone to work with Noel on this translation. Came out beautifully, and that's a process we're continuing now, even for seasons that we're not ready to kind of spoil on the show for you today, because we do think that there is such a beautiful world of comics outside of the Anglosphere, if you will, that are never going to get published by a Fantagraphics or a Drawn and Quarterly, just because there's so much stuff. Small comics are booming right now. Across Europe, there's just this amazing, and South America, there's just this amazing work that's being published that there's just not enough people doing it in the United States to meet that mark. So we're excited to bring some of these more avant-garde and more young cartoonists to the American audience.
So if you do not speak German, how did you come across this work by Noel and know that you wanted to get it translated and publish it? How did that all come about?
Yeah, it started with a kind of like one of those year in review roundups on the TCJ or something like that, someplace, and someone posted a picture of the book from a German Comics Con. I was like, "Oh, that looks really nice." And so I went to Noel's website, looked at it, and I was immediately blown away by the art. I was like, this is gorgeous. I don't know what it means, but it's gorgeous. And so I sent Noel an email. I was like, "Hey, could you, just by chance, would you be willing to send me a script?" And Noel did. And I punched that thing into Google Translate, which is probably not the best choice, but started to see the subtle humor and the really intricate character writing, and even though it was kind of like a blur, looking through a mirror darkly, if you will, it was not it was easy to see how much talent that Noel had and how exciting this book was. And so when I think when I was pitching this to Rob and Daniel, I was kind of like, the kid in the candy shop, I was like dragging them along with me. Rob's like, let me look at it, let me see it. Daniel's like, yes, it's got a funny name, I want to publish it. And then I got Rob the script, and I was like, Rob, read this. And so it takes a while to read a comic in German with a script, and you're kind of like trying to piece it together. And as soon as Rob was done, he sends me a message on like Google Chat or whatever, and I was like, we need to publish this. So it was that like serendipitous moment where it was like, you know, I if there is one thing I trust in this world, and I do not trust many things, but there is one thing I trust, it is the taste of one Sir Rob Clow and one Sir Daniel Elkin. If they like it, then I am pretty sure that it's going to be good. I'm pretty certain. And so when they both were like, yes, let's do this, that's all I needed. So
the other second book is called Now and Other Dreams. It is a collection of short stories from the young cartoonist Daryl Seichik. She is someone whose work I followed for a number of years, and is pretty close to what I would call a prodigy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've literally read virtually everything she's ever published, and it took about her third mini comic until she clicked in to her current style, fully formed. And every comic since has been fantastic.
Yeah.
This is a collection. So she's you may know her, or your viewers or readers may know her as for her comic Missy, which is, you know, quasi autobiographical story of a girl at various ages writing a diary about various things going on in her life. It's pretty downbeat, wildly entertaining, and she has this beautifully expressive stripped down drawing style that is my thing. I love it.
Yeah.
Daryl's also done a number of like surreal, dreamy, dream inspired comics, bordering on comics as poetry, and over the years. And basically I approached her, you know, I have a bunch of names in my back pocket I'm interested in. She was one of the first. And I said, let's talk. What do you got? And we talked about various projects, and we kind of settled on this one, in part because, you know, those comics are all out of print, pretty short runs in terms of printing, and they're excellent. And then she's going to do 2 new stories for it. And we recently met and looked at like the sequencing of comics in an anthology. It's very important. And Daryl has a strong intuitive grasp on how this works. So it's like, you know, with her, it's like this is a very easy editing job. And then we'll have one person wanted to note who's crucial to our process was the graphic designer we hired for Clutter, and that's Keely McCarthy, who is best in the biz, in my opinion. She's done a lot of work for Finagraphics.
Rob's not so humble opinion. Keely's great. I can't speak more favorably about her work and how wonderful she was for us. Just an absolute gem of a human being and a very talented designer.
Yeah, and then the third project is a mini comic, because we're going to be publishing those as well. And this is a series that we'll be publishing as time goes on, and it's called Magic Nation by an artist named Ellen O'Grady, who is published on SOLRAD quite a bit, and this is part of a larger work. Ellen is a fantastic cartoonist. Again, her work is very intuitive and sensitive and beautiful, and she is a newcomer to comics. She's just been doing it a couple of years. and I was so stunned by how good her work was, like right away, that I immediately suggested her for SolRad Presents, and there's uh, enthusiastic agreement.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so that'll be about 48 pages, something like that.
About 48 pages. She's been working on this project and is planning to make it into a graphic novel, and we're hoping that we'll be able to collect each of the individual issues and then publish it as a collected book at the end. So I think, this, it's a much larger project, 2 books and a mini comic versus 1 book. But I think the success that we had with our first Kickstarter was a great launching point for this. We've also been able to do some grant writing through various, German institutes of culture in order to help with the translation and other fees for Noelle's book. And that, and there's some, and we're using that process for other translations and other things we're thinking about moving forward. So we've been able to kind of just bounce off of this first Kickstarter with our eyes set on a kind of a more traditional publishing structure. And right now we're we're a small press, like, and we're I would say it's like lessons learned all the time, right? Like how do you manage this? How do we do this sort of thing? I think the next big thing that we're going to be thinking about is actual distribution through a more traditional book distributor. That's in the short-term plans. Right now we're being distributed through White Squirrel, which is based out of the kind of like Oregon, kind of like the Pacific Northwest, I'll say. And they're great. They've done a lot of Kickstarter fulfillment. They're going to be helping us handle our web store. But I also think we want to be able to get into the Barnes and Nobles of the world, and that's going to require a specific change in focus. And there's going to be, I'm sure, some lessons learned with that as well. But we're excited about that process.
It sounds like you've got a full 2022 ahead of you. So if Noelle's book is slated for Kickstarter or crowdfunding in June, then when are Daryl and Ellen's books
same
slated?
time?
Yeah,
all one track. All one season.
A season all together, and the goal will be like get whatever book you want all together. We're going to fund the printing of these 3 books.
Okay, gotcha. Makes sense. Well, hey, we're probably at a reasonable podcast time right now. We've been chatting for a little over an hour, but I figured I'd open it up to each of you at the end here to see if there was anything you wanted to mention or things you wish I would have asked that I didn't. Just give you a platform here to chat about anything you wanted to at the end.
I think from my perspective, I think that the only thing that I want to put on a platform here is to say that I think one of the things that this project has reminded me of in times in a very difficult 2.5 years has been that family isn't just who you're related to, it's also who you make it out of, right? I think one of the greatest benefits I've had from this working relationship is getting a couple of big brothers out of the deal. I'm the young one of the group. I get to say that. I get to be the youngest. I get to be the bratty one. But I think I don't know how I would have made it through the pandemic without Daniel or Rob, and it's been a complete and utter joy working on these projects with them, and I wouldn't have had it. I wouldn't have traded anything. I wouldn't have traded anything for this. Yeah. So I'm not trying to be too sappy on you, just a little sappy. Get back in there, Tier.
I know. Absolutely. I cannot echo what Alex said enough. Working with, I mean, I knew of Rob before I knew Rob, and getting, when I was doing Your Chicken Enemy and getting to publish Rob was a sort of a dream. And then being in a group or an organization with Rob has been amazing. And I've known Alex, off and on, and then we've just, yeah, it's just been amazing. He and I are sort of a yin and yang in a way, and we bounce off each other really, really well. And it has been an enormous pleasure working with these guys.
Collaboration is one of my favorite things in the world. Yeah. And it is a bulwark against isolation, which is an emotional killer.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to work with people who are as committed to an idea as you are is rare.
Yeah.
And really, in any kind of relationship, is something to be treasured, where everyone is equally meaningful to each other in terms of the partnership. And it's something I don't take for granted. It's rare. And what's funny, though, is that especially as a teacher and an editor and working for SPX, it astounds me to see the ways in which this is kind of replicated itself and played out in my life. And I feel, again, really lucky that sort of like, preparing for SPX, it's a lot of time and energy. It's a lot of work. But I like it. Otherwise I quit. Again, I have work for its own sake does not interest me. Never has. Work for a purpose that I find valuable, that others find valuable. It's what, it's why you get up in the morning. So the SOLRAD project, SPX, writing in general, being able to help artists through working with them is just a tremendous feeling. It's like, there's a sense in which sometimes all we need is a little bit of motivation and inspiration to do things that we always could do and just sometimes didn't know it or think that we could. And being believed in by other people is really valuable. Yeah. And being believed in by Alex and Daniel, has been a big deal. And being able to spread exactly that kind of thing as a central part of our ethos with the website, in that, I don't necessarily agree with every word that every one of our contributors has written. In fact, I vehemently disagree with a lot of it. But
mostly me, but that's fine.
No. But
there was this Ryan Claytor contributor one time.
That guy. Let me tell you about that guy.
But what's important is that the central ethos, our motto, is light, not heat. And in that, it's a good faith agreement that we as critics and writers are looking at things in a fair way. Opinionated, you may disagree with it, but the assurance is that we're not writing it to be controversial or to get clicks or to make people mad so that we get clicks. This is a form of writing I detest. I hate snark for its own sake. I hate reading writers who are like, for their sake of their, critical stand-up routines are savaging people who were trying to create meaningful art. No interest in any of that. And so that's what I'm proud of the most, is that, we're giving a lot of different people, a lot of different platforms to say things about comics. Some of them are comics I have no interest in, and some of which are like directly right in my wheelhouse. But I like that we're making a point of reaching as wide an audience as possible without writing about typical mainstream corporate superhero comics.
Yeah.
Did do a Heathcliff week.
That was good.
We did a
wonderful.
GD Heathcliff week, and I've never been
Which was
prouder.
amazing.
It was
Yes.
amazing. If
It's
a true joy and an honor to do Heathcliff week. That was a lot of fun.
Maybe you can
the two
send
writers.
Maybe you can send me a link to that, and I can put it in the show notes.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely.
You gotta read it.
We
It's like-
even have an interview with Peter Gallagher, the guy that does Heathcliff for syndicated newspapers. The guy is a mad genius. This
is not like an ironic thing. This is sort of like, someone's like, this is a weird comic strip, and we had two different writers write about it from different points of view, both of which were fantastic and really compelling. One was Andy Neal, who I'm like, I basically, compelled him to like, you should start writing criticism. And then he just, every time he comes up with the most bizarre pitches, and he's like, you'll probably won't want to print this, and it's like, no, we do. The one other one I'll mention is that he did a review of the Eisner nominated Best Humor Comics, of which he was not nominated, and despite the fact it's a humor comic, and did it from that point of view. And it was both funny, it was self-deprecating, and the analysis of each of the nominees was top notch.
Yeah. So
good. And I'd never read anything like that before in that kind of format, and it worked so well. So yeah, that's someone I want more of on the site, because it's just such a weird loose cannon in that way, in a way that I like.
I think that's something that can only be possible on a site like SOLRAD, where you have that kind of like, we're willing to take some risks. We're not really affiliated with any, we're not affiliated with any other major organization. So we're able to kind of let people to kind of go off the deep end a little bit, like Andy did. And it turned out to be a great article. So I think maybe the last thing to say, and I don't want to interrupt Daniel's time, so if you have a plug,
no, you go right ahead.
I think one of the things that I think the last thing I guess I have to leave us with is like, what's going to happen with crowdfunding now, right? Like what's the future of crowdfunding look like? Because we crowdfunded Clutter and it went really well, and I don't think we could have made the project happen without crowdfunding. It's what's launched our publishing house. It's what's given us the ability to slate these two amazing books we're super excited and proud of. But with this transition to Web 3.0 with blockchain and NFTs kind of technology, there's a real toxicity to that, in the comics reading audience, I believe. Maybe I just spend too much time on Twitter, I'm not sure. But we're seeing people like struggling to kickstart projects now that previously had done a really easy job of kickstarting seasons books. So I think there's going to be some changes there. I hope that Fieldmouse Press is on the forefront of that. We're hoping to be, but more news to come as we kind of figure out what our next steps look like, because I don't think, we can't in good conscience use a technology that burns down the planet. It just as simple as that. Our ethos has to be consistent across what we're doing. And so, I think that the community will be with us if we decide to jump ship to Kickstarter. and I hope they will be. So we're gonna just try to figure that out and figure out what's next.
We're doing a lot of due diligence with this.
Yeah.
Great. Well, just to wrap things up here, I wanted to bounce off something that Rob was saying. And I was having a conversation with a well-known cartoonist, and I make comics, but I also do other things. And one of those things is designing neon signs. And this other cartoonist also does things outside of comics. And he was saying, so how's your relationship with that neon bender that you work with? And I'm like, oh my God, he's amazing. He's a complete and total master of his medium. He's been doing it for well over 30 years. And on top of that, he's an incredibly stand-up guy, like stands behind his work 100%. If anything goes wrong, he's there to fix it for no cost. Just like, I can't say enough good things about him. And this cartoonist who's been around for a very long time said to me, good, value that relationship. And I feel like that's what each of you guys have with one another in Fieldmouse Press. So it was really great to speak with each of you here today and kind of get a better understanding of what each of your roles are in Fieldmouse Press, and get a glimpse of what's to come. It's really exciting publishing slate you've got coming up here for 2022. Glad we can scoop it and let some more folks know about SOLRAD and Fieldmouse and all the exciting things you have coming up. So thank you so much for being on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. And I wish you all the best with publishing 2022 and beyond.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks, Ryan.
And there you have it, a conversation with the folks behind Fieldmouse Press. I don't know about you, but I've been following what they do for the past couple of years or so and really interested in what they're doing and their trajectory moving forward. And I hope that answered some similar questions that you may have had as well. So I wanted to take a moment just to thank Daniel Elkin, Rob Clow, and Alex Hoffman for taking the time to chat with me. And if you enjoyed this conversation, consider joining my Patreon page, which is at patreon.com/Ryan Claytor. Thank you so much for tuning in, and keep making comics.